You know that one person in your life who always cancels plans at the last minute? Who says, "I'm fine," when they're clearly not? Who disappears for days, sometimes weeks, and then comes back like nothing happened? Maybe that person is someone you love. Maybe that person is you. Here's what most people get wrong. They think self-isolation is a personality quirk, a preference, an introvert thing. But psychology tells us something far more uncomfortable than that. Self-isolation isn't something people choose the way they choose a favorite color. It's something they learned, usually before they were old enough to understand what was happening to them. And once you understand when it started and why it started, you will never look at a person who pulls away the same way again. Let me take you back, not to adulthood, not to a bad breakup or a rough year at work. I want to take you back to childhood, because that's where this story almost always begins. When a child is young, they are completely dependent on the adults around them, not just for food and shelter, but for emotional regulation. A child doesn't yet have the brain development to manage big feelings on their own. They need a parent, a caregiver, someone to look at them and say, "I see you. You're safe. I've got you." That's called co-regulation. And it is not optional for healthy development. It is essential. But what happens when that doesn't come? What happens when the parent is emotionally unavailable? Not because they're cruel, but because they're overwhelmed or depressed, or were never taught how to give that kind of warmth themselves. What happens when a child cries and nobody comes? When they're scared and told to toughen up? When they're excited and met with indifference? When they're hurting and the message they receive, spoken or unspoken, is "you're too much"? The child learns. And children are extraordinarily fast learners. They learn that their emotions are a problem. They learn that needing people leads to disappointment. They learn that the safest thing they can do, the most reliable way to protect themselves from pain, is to stop reaching out, to handle things alone, to become self-sufficient in a way that isn't strength at all. It's armor. It's a coping mechanism built by a small person doing the best they possibly could in a situation they had no control over. And here's the part that breaks my heart every single time. That armor works. It genuinely works for a child. Pulling away protects them. Going quiet keeps the peace. Not needing anything means not being rejected. In the short term, isolation feels like safety. But the child grows up. The years pass. The original threat, the unavailable parent, the unstable home, the environment where vulnerability was dangerous, that threat is gone. But the nervous system doesn't know that. The brain doesn't get a memo that says, "You're safe now." The pattern that was learned in childhood gets baked in. It becomes automatic. It becomes identity. So now you have an adult, maybe someone you know, maybe yourself, who, the moment things get emotionally intense, goes quiet. Who, the moment they feel themselves getting close to someone, find a reason to pull back. Who feels genuinely uncomfortable when people get too near, not because they don't want connection, but because somewhere deep in their nervous system, closeness still feels like danger. Psychologists call this an avoidant attachment style. And it doesn't mean someone is broken. It doesn't mean they're cold or selfish or incapable of love. It means they learned very young, very thoroughly, that depending on people is risky, and the brain, above all else, is wired for survival. It will choose familiar pain over unfamiliar vulnerability every single time. Here's what makes this especially painful. The very thing these people need most, genuine human connection, is the thing that triggers their deepest fear. So they isolate, and in the silence, they convince themselves they prefer it this way, that they're just not a people person, that they're better off alone. And sometimes they almost believe it. But underneath that, there's a loneliness so deep it becomes a physical ache. Because we are social creatures, isolation doesn't feel like freedom to the nervous system. It feels like abandonment, even when you're the one doing the isolating. And this is where I want to speak directly to anyone watching this who recognizes themselves in what I'm describing. You're not broken. You're not too damaged to be loved. You're not someone who is fundamentally incapable of closeness. You're someone who built a very intelligent, very logical system of protection based on the information you had at the time. And that system served you. But you're not that child anymore. You do not live in that house anymore. You do not need that armor in the same way. The work, and I won't pretend it isn't work, is teaching your nervous system that it is safe to be seen, that not everyone will leave, that not every moment of vulnerability will end in pain. That's not a thought you can just think your way into. It lives in the body. It's rewritten slowly, through safe relationships, through therapy, through moments where you let someone in and the world doesn't end. But it starts with awareness. It starts with understanding why you do what you do, not to excuse it, but to stop being ashamed of it. Because shame keeps people isolated more than any childhood wound ever could. If you self-isolate, you probably learned it young. You probably learned it from someone who was also just trying to survive. That doesn't make what happened to you okay. But it does mean the story doesn't have to end there. The most courageous thing a person who learned to pull away can do is slowly, carefully, on their own terms, choose to stay.